Hey everybody, welcome to Money's No Object. I am your host, Dylan Howell. This is episode number 95 of our YouTube channel and podcast, and I could not be more excited to continue sharing with you all personal finance topics that I think could really help you in your long-term financial journey. Today, what we're going to talk about, in the same vein as we've been talking about all week, your money and your marriage, we're going to talk about some questions that need to be asked before you ever jump into marriage. And these are not just questions that need to be asked to your significant other whom you expect to marry, but also questions that you need to sit down and ask yourself and really ponder over to determine, if financially or, in other areas of your life, if you are prepared to marry this person. And so we're really going to dig into each and every one of these questions and really talk about why they are so important to the success of your impending marriage. Before we get started though, if you could go down below, hit the big red subscribe button, like this video, leave me any feedback in the comments as we go throughout this video, and I'll be sure to respond and hopefully answer any questions that you may have. Also, if you're listening on Apple or Spotify podcast, thank you so much for listening there. Just make sure that you subscribe and leave a review for me on those platforms. Also, follow me on social media at MNO with Dylan. And that'd be really good supplementary material to the things that you hear me talk about daily on either the podcast or the YouTube channel. And then lastly, if you need somebody to help you walk through your financial situation, if you need a financial coach, you need somebody to help you create a plan and to be accountable to that plan, then I can definitely help you do that. You just have to go to my website, www.MNOwithDylan.com. Click on the Work with Dylan tab, and you can pick the financial coaching session type that would work best for you. Then we can push forward in your pursuit of your long-term financial goals. So we're going to talk about questions, like I said, that you and your potential spouse need to go over together, and then also questions that you need to ask yourself. Now, obviously, this is a money show. This is a money podcast, a money YouTube channel. So obviously, the questions are going to have a lot to do with money, but some of them are going to have a lot more to do just with you and who you are and what you are expecting out of this marriage and, what types of things need to be put in place before you ever jump into this big commitment. Now, before you ever have any type of conversation with your potential spouse, you need to sit down and have a conversation with yourself and ask yourself some questions that are really going to get at the heart of what you are thinking about moving into this marriage. And so these potential questions, I decided we'll just nail down on the financial things here. And then when you're talking with your spouse, obviously things need to be more than just financial. But we're going to focus on the financial questions, and then we will also get into a few other areas when we're talking about questions that you need to ask your spouse. So here we go. The first question you need to ask yourself is, what is my current financial situation? And this seems like a very, easy question to answer. It seems like, oh, of course you should know what your current financial situation is. I mean, who doesn't know what their current situation is? Well, you would be surprised. Many people don't know what their current financial situation is. And the importance of this question is before you ever talk to your spouse about these things, you need to be in a place where you understand what's going on in your own bank accounts, in your own, borrowing habits, in your own spending habits, in your saving and investing and giving habits, all of those things. You need to understand what's going on in your current situation. And so when I say what's your current situation, what I mean is, what kind of assets do you have? What kind of liabilities or debt do you have? And make sure you get all of those listed out, because that is very, very important as far as talking to your potential spouse. They need to know those things too. You need to know how much is in your bank account, how much you're making each month or annually, however you want to do that. You have to know all of these things. You have to know where you currently stand. And if you know where you currently stand, then you kind of get a jump on being able to talk freely with your potential spouse, because then you can give them honest, truthful answers that will allow them to really internalize and make good decisions and help you guys to walk through whatever situation you're about to jump into together. because you are about to jump into a situation together. Your current financial situation is supposed to, like I've talked about this week, merge with the other person's financial situation. And once those are merged, then you can begin working together along the same path. And so knowing what yours is going to be very, very helpful to knowing what your financial situation looks like together moving forward. And then the next question you need to ask yourself is, am I a spender or a saver by nature? Spenders and savers are the two big, broad areas that we put people into these categories when it comes to what they are financially. And there's no perfect, you're the exact spender or the exact saver. No, obviously everybody's got a little bit of the other in them, but majority of the time, what are you? And the importance of knowing the answer to that particular question is that if I know what I am, if I know what my tendencies are, then I can honestly communicate those to my potential spouse. They can know where I stand. They can know what type of person I am, what type of tendencies I have, whether I am more apt to, save most of the money that I make, or whether I'm more apt to go to Amazon and spend all the money that I make, or whatever it may be. You need to know where you're at so you can communicate that to your potential spouse, and so you guys will know what your strengths are and what your weaknesses are, and you can attack those weaknesses and double down on the strengths. So it's extremely important to know what you are financially, and if it doesn't fall exactly into the wording of saver or spender, that's perfectly fine. But you need to know what you're more apt to do. Are you more apt to save and invest, or are you more apt to spend? And a lot of times those spenders are good givers too. So that's important to note. So, you might have some mixed traits between the two, but what are you really? And communicate that to your spouse when you all are talking about money. So you need to know that yourself before you ever take it and can talk to someone else about it. And then you need to ask yourself, do I have a budget? Do I know how this works? Do I know what's coming in and what's going out every month? And this is similar to talking about your financial situation, but your financial situation has a lot more to do with one point in time. When I'm talking about your budget, I'm talking about you need to know what's going on month by month, what type of expenses you're going to have. It needs to just be a lot more detailed. You need to know what income's coming in, what expenses are going out, and what you're left to work with every month in the categories of giving, saving, or extra miscellaneous spending. And so if you know what is going on with your budget, then it's going to be a lot easier to combine budgets with your potential spouse. It's going to be a lot easier to see where they are and say, okay, well, this is where I am. Let's just add. And it won't be a perfect addition, obviously, because there will be expenses that go away on both sides, and there will be expenses that are added, but it will be added for the both of you. So, but that's a really important thing to know, because if you know where you're ending up every month, if you know where your money is coming from and where your money is going, then your spouse is likely going to like that information. They're likely going to like to know what's going on, and this will actually be really telling as to whether or not you were truthful with yourself about whether you are a spender or a saver, because your budget tells all. Your budget tells where your money's going. And don't just do a budget as far as like what I want to happen. Be realistic. Be realistic with where your money is currently going. And then obviously you and your potential spouse can begin to make changes and begin to know what's going on. But you have to know how your budget works. You have to know what's coming in and what's going out. And then if you know that, you can go a long way in personal finance without anything particularly difficult being on your horizon. Because what is the biggest thing? The biggest thing is spend less than you make. And guess what? That is what the budget tells you if you're spending more or less than the money you are bringing in every single month. And then the fourth question you need to ask yourself is debt on the table? And this can mean multiple things, but I kind of want you to explore each of these different avenues. First of all, do you have debt? Right now, that should be in determining what your current financial situation is. But in having debt, am I going to go into further debt in the future? Do I, is that something that I do? Is that something I believe in? Do I want to go into debt later on? And that will help you to, determine what your future is going to look like financially. Now, obviously, if you are listening to this channel, if you're listening to this show, then what you want to be doing is not going into debt, not accruing debt and accruing interest over time. You want to be out of debt and moving forward on a cash strong basis in your financial plan. So obviously, if you're listening to this, I don't think debt should ever be on the table for you other than a mortgage. But if you are in a place where you do have debt, then you really need to ask yourself, am I going to go back into this again? Is this something that I am attached to? Is this something that I do? Do I have a bad habit? Do I spend too much money that I don't have to impress people that I don't even like? And if the answer is yes, then you need to work on that, with yourself. And then you also need to be able to communicate that to your potential spouse and say, hey, if you don't believe in debt, then say, hey, I don't believe in going into debt. I don't believe in car debt, or, I don't believe in taking student loans out to go to school. I don't believe in credit cards, all these different types of things. I don't believe in doing this. And that is something that you will be able to communicate well to your potential spouse. And then you will see how they feel about debt and what their thoughts are on debt. And you'll be able to hopefully come to, an honest agreement and an honest place of this is how we are going to work moving forward with the debt that we do have potentially, and whether or not we are going to take out debt in the future. Hopefully that answer is not. And then the last question you need to ask yourself about how you are financially and what's going on with you financially is, what are your priorities? And this kind of goes back to, are you a saver or are you a spender? But what your priorities are is a lot more detailed than that, right? What are things in your budget that just can't go away? They're deal breakers. They're things that you cannot go without. What are things that you do that you will not stop doing? And this can be good or bad, right? So for instance, if you make a priority of giving every month, then that's something that you need to be able to articulate to your spouse, or else you two may be on different pages and they're like, well, why are you giving away X amount of money every month? That's wasteful. Or you might be like, well, this is what I believe is right and what I believe I'm supposed to do. And so if you haven't already articulated that to your potential spouse, then that can be an issue. And then you also want to know, okay, do I prioritize investing or saving, or do I prioritize, buying new things that I like? And then being able to tell your potential spouse about all of these things, and it helps them to get a better idea of who you are, and it helps them to get a better idea of what to expect from you as far as financial habits moving forward. And so, like I said, all of these 5 questions that I just went over are things that you need to be asking yourself, things that you need to be going over with yourself to better determine, who am I financially, and how can I best articulate to my spouse who I am financially. That way we can begin to work together and do things and be on the same page. Now this brings us to 5 questions that we need to talk to our potential spouse about. And since we've been talking about our finances, the first of which is, where do we stand on money? Where do we stand on our finances? And there's a million places that I can take this. But we've already talked about at the outset of this week about, you need to be communicating with your spouse. You need to be communicating about money with your spouse. Before you get married, you need to put these things out on the table. And that's what we're talking about here. We're talking about putting these things out on the table before you ever get married. So you really need to learn several things about your spouse, and your spouse needs to learn several things about you. What needs to be learned is, 1, do we have debt? Do you have debt? And if you do you plan on getting more, right? Like I said a moment ago, that's a huge thing, because then that's a big part of what you do financially, right? A big part of what you do financially is based around whether or not you are okay with going into debt, and in what amounts. And hopefully you are not. But the fact that you're not doesn't mean the person that you're marrying is not okay with a car payment, or not okay with a credit card balance, or something like that. So you need to talk about that. You need to talk about how debt is going to impact your marriage and what you are going to do moving forward. In this particular place, you need to understand that somebody having debt is not bad. What is bad is them not being willing to be on the same page with you on how to attack it, on how to get rid of it, and how to move forward out of it. You guys need to be on the same page and have the same overarching plan of how you're going to deal with your finances. Then you can begin doing things in a very unified way, and then you'll be in a lot better situation over the long term. Then you need to ask them things like, well, what do you want to do with money over the long term? What do you want to do with money for the rest of your life? What do you want our money to look like 30 years from now? And in asking them this question, you'll get a really good idea of what they prioritize. You'll get a really good idea of how they feel about money and what they believe is possible for your money. Because if it's something very drab and very dull and something that doesn't seem like there's much ambition to it, then maybe they don't believe that they can be wealthy, and maybe they don't believe that they can do big things with money. But if it is something, very vibrant and very energetic and something big that they're passionate about and all these types of things, well, maybe they believe that they can do a lot with money, and they believe in the abundance mindset that there's plenty out there and we can go get it and we can do this together and build together. And that's what you're really looking for when you're looking at that question. But then other goals that you may have, right? You want to know what their financial goals are. Do they want to be a millionaire? Do they want to get out of debt? Do they want to have X amount in savings? Do they want to pay for their kids' college? Do they want to, pay their house off in a certain amount of time? What do they want to do financially? And then obviously you tell them what you want to do financially and kind of come to a common ground on how you feel about your personal finances and how you feel about your financial life moving forward. And I know asking questions like this is really getting to the root of who you are, and it can be a bit uncomfortable from time to time. And if it is uncomfortable, that's okay. But push through the uncomfortable nature of these questions and ask them to one another, and you will feel a lot better about the outcome because you will actually get to see what your potential spouse is really about on these really big issues. Because we've talked about earlier this week that money is one of the biggest things that people fight about and get divorced over. And if it's one of the biggest things you fight about and get divorced over, then asking these questions is so important, and you'll be able to move forward with a lot more confidence once these questions have been put out on the table. Now, that was most of the financial stuff. Like I said, we were going to spend most of our time on the financial questions anyway. But there are 4 more questions that I really want to go over that are not financial questions, that are really important to the success of your future marriage, and are things that you can use as real guidelines of what are we about as a couple? What are we going to be about as a couple? And is this going to work before we jump into marriage? And so the couple that I have here are, I think, very pointed questions, and they can get you a long way as far as knowing who your potential spouse is. So one of the things that I think needs to be on the table is what are your religious views and how are they going to impact our marriage? Now, hopefully, if you're about to get married to a person or you're engaged, you know the answer to this question. You know what their religious beliefs are. You know how they feel about their faith. And hopefully you know how serious or not serious they are about it, and whether or not that aligns with how you feel about your faith. And hopefully your faiths align because it's going to be a lot more difficult to be successful over the long term if your faiths do not align. I'm not saying, if one person's Baptist and the other person's Methodist, that it's not going to work out. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is, if you have somebody who is Jewish and somebody who is a Christian, that's going to be a lot more difficult because, you get into a situation where you have different beliefs, you have different holidays, you have different things that your families do for traditions, and it just gets really, really tricky and a little bit messy in that place. So knowing where they stand religiously and where they stand in their faith is extremely important. And hopefully that's something that you've already gotten ironed out and you can just move right past that question without much issue. Then another question you want to put out there on the table is, how are our personality types? Are our personality types, are they really, cohesive? Do they work together? Or are they, combustible? Do they, light on fire? Do they blow up when put together? What does this look like? How is this going to look when we are living in the same household? When we're, going through life day by day together? How is it going to look when you have a bad day and I've had a good day? And how are we going to be able to mesh in those situations? What's it going to look like? And is it going to be a situation where I'm not going to meet the needs of you emotionally because that's not how I feel, or you not going to meet my needs emotionally because that's not how you feel, or whatever? And then just being aware of that. I'm not saying that this can be a deal breaker type question. This is just something that you need to be aware of. If you're aware that you both have very domineering personalities and that you're going to bump heads a lot, then maybe you can be more clear about how you're going to go about conflict. Maybe you can be more mindful of, when a conflict does arise, you don't want to, blow up. You want to, try to take the road less traveled, try to be more calm, more easygoing in those particular situations. And so this is not an end-all be-all question, but what it is it's a good way to know who your potential spouse is and who you are and how you're going to work together, and whether or not it's going to be seamless or very, very difficult. And obviously there are 100 different personality tests out there that you could go and see, who you really are and how things work together. And like I said, not a deal breaker, but something that you need to keep in mind, because personality types can clash, and you just need to make sure that that's taken care of on the front end. And then a big question that you need to talk to your potential spouse about, and again, this is something that I think you should know by this point, but if you don't, you absolutely need to talk about it. And that is, are we going to have kids? Do we want to have kids? And this can be, again, if you haven't talked about this can be extremely uncomfortable. But if you have talked about it, then it's not a big deal. But if you ask this question, it is going to be extremely telling as to what you want for the long term, what you want in your life. And if they don't want kids and you do, that's going to be a very hard thing to get over. You see it in marriages time and time again. It is very difficult for people to get over the fact that one person doesn't want to have kids and they do. Or it's very, very difficult for somebody to get over the fact that their spouse does want to have kids and they don't. And that can lead to a lot of marital issues that we don't want to have to deal with down the line. And it can even lead to resentment if one spouse actually gives in to the other. Now, if they give in to the other, they can resent the other spouse for, giving them what they wanted, even though it was not what they wanted. And we don't want to be in that situation either. So you need to know if your potential spouse wants to have children. I hope you already know that, but if you don't, you need to know that before you ever step into marriage, because it can just create so many problems. And obviously, I'm a guy, I obviously want to have kids. That's my wife's pregnant. I'm extremely excited about that, right? But not everybody feels that way about children. Don't just make that assumption if you have not talked about it already. Then the last question you want to ask, and you may think that this one is really uncomfortable, but it's extremely important, is what are our boundaries going to look like with in-laws? Now, I'm not saying that you need to push away from your in-laws. I'm not saying you need to have a ton of space between you and your in-laws, and that you shouldn't like them and that they aren't nice people. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that there can be issues if your mother-in-law lives right down the block or right next door. That can be problematic. You need to figure out what it's going to look like, where you're going to live potentially, how important it is to live really close to your family, how often you're going to see your family, how often you're going to talk to your family, how often you guys are going to go out and have dinner and things like that, right? You need to have a general idea of how close you are with your family and how close your potential spouse is with theirs. Then there's really no surprise if your spouse is on the phone with their mother every single night, then you really know what's going on, because that can be problematic. It can be problematic in the time that you all spend together and what you expected, right? Having incorrect expectations can be a really big issue. And don't just assume that they feel the same way about their family that you feel about yours. Be on the same page and be able to talk through what that's going to look like in your marriage. And it'll save you a lot of hassle, a lot of trouble, and hopefully you get a fair amount of distance from in-laws, and a fair amount of time that you actually get to go spend with them. And it works for you, whatever works for you. So for some people, it works that you see them every day. For some people, it works if you see them every 3 months. I get it. But you need to know what works for you. You need to know what works for your potential spouse, and you need to come to a set of agreements on those types of issues. So I really hope this helps you guys. I really hope that you guys can take this to heart and ask some of these difficult questions to yourself and to your potential spouse, and really get a lot of clarity before you jump into marriage. Because if you do ask these questions and you do come to good agreements and good places of wanting the same things, then I think you're well on your way to having a successful marriage over the long term. So thank you guys for watching this video. If you could, go down below, hit the big red subscribe button, like this video, leave any feedback down in the comments if you haven't done so already. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify podcasts, then make sure to subscribe there and leave me a review. I'd be really grateful for a good review on either one of those platforms. Follow me on social media at MNO with Dylan. That's really good stuff that I'm putting out daily to go along with these episodes. And if you want somebody to work with you on your long-term financial plan, to build a plan for you and help you walk through it and be accountable to someone for walking through that plan correctly, then I can definitely help you out. Just go to my website, www.mnowithdylan.com, click on the Work with Dylan tab, and pick the financial coaching session type that would work best for you, and we can begin pushing toward your long-term financial goals as soon as you're ready. So tune in Monday as I talk about student loans and how they are not necessary for your educational needs and in your financial life. And next week is going to be a lot about college and paying for college and going to college and all these different types of things. So hopefully you guys can get a lot out of those episodes, and it'll be really good information that hopefully can keep you out of student debt and keep you in a place where you can be a productive member of society on the other side of higher education. So thanks for tuning into this episode of Money's No Object. I am your host, Dylan Howell. God bless.